particular monastery and church belongs to the Coptic Orthodox Church, an Egyptian branch of Christianity with roots that go all the way back to the 1st century CE.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
So basically, I just want to go over 6 things that I feel Religion for Breakfast's video on Copts didn't fully capture. The first of which actually has to do with the population of Copts in Egypt. He claimed it was about equal to 10%, but really I would say following Pope Tewodros's estimation, it should be closer to 15%. And here's why. This estimation is based off of a baptismal certificate survey, which was taken a few years ago on all the Copts. And I feel like this would be more accurate in terms of Coptic representation. It's more reliable than the government taking it because obviously a lot of Copts distrust the Muslim government, and the Muslim government obviously has a bias to represent the Muslim population rather than the Christian population to show its sort of stronghold on the state. And really, there's also no reason for us to make up a number as small as 15%. If we really wanted to make up this number, like a few people would claim, then why wouldn't we go with 20%, 25% to sort of establish our claim in the country? So the next sort of thing that I feel he didn't capture fully is the relation of St. Mark to Egypt and really starting the Church of Alexandria, which he says is dubious according to Eusebius. So I would say the church itself and all of its stories, even the Bible, is historical. And really, even in our creed, we say Jesus Christ was crucified before Pontius Pilate to cement this, that this is something that happened in history. It's not merely a spiritual contribution, even though obviously the church is a spiritual entity. It has multiple things that it has contributed to the historical field, to the scholarly field, and I feel in modern times we like to sort of separate these fields rather than using them as one in tandem. Sort of the first piece of evidence I want to use to support my claim that St. Mark did start the Church of Alexandria is the Old Latin prologues. And the Old Latin prologues are dated to about the 2nd to 3rd centuries, so that would place them pre-Eusebius, the main person who he's relying on, and also are non-Alexandrian, so there can be no claim of bias there. And they distinctly claim that St. Mark started the Church of Alexandria after he left Peter, which is the Coptic Church's claim on its beginnings. Furthermore, as a sort of secondary source, because I know multiple people doubt Jerome also uses Clement and Papias to affirm their claims, and then proceeds to say that St. Mark started a magnificent church in Egypt that all followers of Christ should follow its example, and this is clearly talking about the Coptic Church. So even later Latin writers affirm the same thing. So again, these are all non-Coptic, non-Alexandrian sources, so there can be no claim of sort of, okay, this is your church's bias. The third thing I want to cover is, okay, he said a lot of the average Copts have this sort of misconception, or maybe they don't care as much about, okay, the theological difference between the churches. It's just semantics, it doesn't matter. Or that their ethnicity, okay, you know, we are Copts, we are proud of this, but at the end of the day, we're all just Arabic Christians, we're all just Arabs from the Levant like everyone else in the Middle East. And for the sort of Arabic ethnicity claim, I'd like to direct everyone to a previous video I did earlier, and it really goes over how Copts are not Arab genetically, historically, logically, by every stretch of the definition. As for the semantics claims, and I hear a lot of these arguments all the time, you know, in church, online. I'd like to go through them one by one. I'll spend a little bit of time on them. The first one is, even if this is the majority belief of laymen and laity in the church, this can be incorrect. Back then, clergy who became Arian were in the majority, the vast majority, against St. Athanasius. And still, the Arian belief remained incorrect. It is not with population that makes something true. Furthermore, for each of these councils, especially councils where splits happened like Ephesus and Chalcedon, they had representatives, legates. Obviously, Chalcedon didn't represent everyone at the time, but just to make over the point that, okay, they did have these sort of representatives from the two opposing sides, you could say, and a translator for all of the bishops. So they're not just sitting there, twiddling their thumbs, not doing anything. So it wouldn't really make sense to gather all of these bishops and expend all of this effort, and they're just sitting there, and really they're just agreeing without purpose. So the third thing is, our saints after, like Saint Dioscorus, clearly cite the Tome of Leo or the opposing Chalcedonian side of things and denies it. So this is a clear representation of something that was translated, and he clearly says that I do not affirm these two natures, these two wills, operations, etc. And if you are to brute force your way and say, okay, it was still a misunderstanding, you would have to claim, okay, all of our history of fathers after the schism, and even before, because our fathers after cite the fathers before for their one-natured claims, were all confused. It was all just, misunderstanding between the heretics and our fathers. So it just kind of destroys our tradition in and of itself, because everything becomes relative. Another claim that I hear a lot, even from scholars and historians, is, okay, there were some political elements, so that means the council is fully political. And again, this doesn't follow. Just because it is a council in the center of a city and it decides to confirm the faith of the empire, doesn't mean the council was fully political or it had fully political intention. In the case of Chalcedon, there could be definitely gigantic political motives that drive the bishops to do it. But again, there are, at the end of the day, within the council, theological elements, like semantic elements, that aren't meaningless. And they're not meaningless because obviously we believe that the Holy Spirit is guiding the first three ecumenical councils, and the Chalcedonians believe the Holy Spirit guides the doctrine affirmed in Chalcedon as well. So you can't say that the Holy Spirit is confused or it made a mistake, or maybe there was issues with translation. Peter gave a sermon to the 3,000 in all different types of languages with the Holy Spirit. Do we really think that these councils affirmed by our fathers and the fathers after them as Holy Spirit inspired had a language barrier? It just doesn't follow, and it's not consistent. So sort of the next claim is, Coptic resistance ended in the 8th century, and while this may not be fully incorrect, I just want to clear up a few things. The first is jizya just preferential tax treatment? And by every definition of the word, it is not. In the Quran, it clearly states that you are to fight those who do not believe in Allah or comply until they pay the tax and are submitting. Right? So this is not optional. This is not something that, okay, the IRS might put you in prison or tax you even more. This was something you had to do. So it's not as light as this phrasing may make it seem. And for this, even the hadiths claim it. And even if you reject the hadiths, these are historical artifacts from the Muslims that say they fought against the people until they submitted to their belief and then would still have to pay it. So again, you have to pay it, and sometimes you would still even have to convert and say their statement of belief regardless. So this is something that is non-optional, and you can't get around. And really, that's what led to sort of a lot of Egyptian revolts and riots. For example, resentment built up by these insane taxes on the first invasions of the Muslims, which was essentially like a 4% tax on Copts, which would be increased depending on the vizier, right? And of course, this is on every product, every produce, whatever. And
Al-Makrizi, who is a Muslim historian of Egypt,
speaks of this persecution on Copts, not including taxation, but other things that were in place on Copts when the Muslims first invaded, the likes of which they had never endured. So it had never happened before in all of Coptic history. And all Christians, for example, were branded. Anyone without a brand would have their hand cut off. They would be branded again, tortured, even worse. For example, churches, icons, monasteries were burnt down, monks chased out of their monasteries. And because of this tax, the farmers were the initial revolutionaries, but again, they're too disorganized to win. You have this gigantic Muslim sort of empire force that's been invading several countries, fighting against the Byzantines, and a few farmers from different locations trying to come together. The Muslims just call over other empires, other countries back up, and then they just eventually destroy them. And what happens is these revolts happen a little bit later in the 8th century, but they end in harsher punishments. The Pope, who they had imprisoned, had to plead with them on behalf of the Christian, and eventually when the vizier gets switched out to a more lenient one, the punishments do stop. So I want to go over a brief history of Zeitoun. Of course, this requires a video in and of itself because of this miraculous apparition, but a burst of light appears on a church in Egypt, in Cairo. It was actually a Muslim who sees it first and thinks it's a little girl about to jump, tells her, don't jump. And instead, Saint Mary, or the burst of light, starts floating back and forth across the church. And this starts to happen again and again and again, 6 times, and it draws crowds, cops, Muslims, and even the president. And obviously the president gets sick of it and thinks it's sort of a trick by the cops and decides to turn off all the lights in the street. And of course, this has no effect. St. Mary still keeps appearing, and this is seen again by Muslims, Copts, even Catholic representatives who were sent down to confirm the miracles. So again, these miracles were undeniable at the time, and again, the Coptic Church had nothing to do with it. Something obviously straight from God that enriched the church at the time and brought everyone and more people to Christ. And really, I find it funny that some people online will say, oh, it's a hologram, or, you know, the church did all this, or even atheists will say it's caused by earthquakes, which how do earthquakes cause lights? It just doesn't make sense. And finally, I want to end up this video with the chapter of Isaiah 19, which is filled with prophecies about Egypt, specifically Isaiah 19:25, which claims that the Lord of hosts will bless Egypt, my people, Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. And this is fulfilled when Christ goes to Egypt as a baby. And it's really amazing to see the Coptic Church specifically as a church that is prophesied in the Bible before its start by St. Mark. And you see this even affirmed in Isaiah 19:19-22, saying how there is an altar to the Lord in the midst of Egypt, and the Egyptians will know him and offer to him, which is obviously the offering of Eucharist, the offering of the liturgy. And he will strike and heal it. They will return to the Lord, and he will be entreated by them and heal them. So this is, again, prophesizing the return of Egypt. So again, this is prophesizing the return of Egypt to a church of the Lord. And you can actually find this altar in Deir el-Muharrak, which is the oldest monastery in Egypt. And I just want to emphasize that this tradition isn't found in Catholic, Protestant, Eastern Orthodox, any other sort of rite or tradition. And it just something that really makes the Coptic Orthodox Church special.
So thanks for watching, and make sure to do the things.